start, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this harrowing news from Santa Barbara from the past week. It appears that without any detectable prior fixation upon QAnon, Matthew Coleman entered a days-long altered state in which he was able to drive his children over 200 miles south over the Mexican border to murder them and leave them in a ditch. From the statement he made to the FBI, he seems to recognize that what he was doing was wrong, but that he couldn't stop himself. Now, this isn't the only act of gruesome violence linked with QAnon fixations. There have been other murders, but also kidnappings of children. And of course, children are at the symbolic center of QAnon mythology. So as an ex-QAnon, somebody who is indoctrinated, were you surprised to hear this story?
Not at all. I thought that it was only a matter of time. I think it's only a matter of time before we see more of this, much more. There's a pattern that's been evolving over the last few, say, months, especially, and escalating. And I'll be honest, when I saw this, I didn't even click the article. I was like, oh yeah, that's obviously that happened. I'll read it later. And it took me like a day to get to it because it wasn't a priority, because I was not surprised at all.
Do you feel that coverage like this, what does it do? I mean, it was very alarming for many people. Our feeds filled up with it. For you, it was entirely expectable. But how do you see a story like this bringing the dangerous impacts of QAnon more deeply to public awareness?
I mean, absolutely. Any story where someone does something violent and then attributes it to a particular cause is going to create concern about that particular cause. But I don't think on a broader level that, I mean, I don't think it doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter whether this is good or bad, whether the media should do this or do that, because they have to. There's way too many Q followers these days. There's way too many actions by Q followers. It permeates through every aspect of our society. And I remember when I was in the cult, or with a Q, for the first couple of years, the media very rarely reported on QAnon. And you know they were aware of it, because I remember Time Magazine named Q as one of their people of the year in 2018. So I'm just guessing, I would say that they probably didn't want to talk about it too much in order to not escalate it and aid it by spreading the message and creating awareness. But we're way past the Rubicon at this point. It's metastasized, it's metamorphed, so it doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. It is what it is.
Rachel, you have treated and interviewed countless former cult members. And in many of these stories, violence is a real and present danger. But I'm wondering if you can lay out some basics for how cult indoctrination crosses the line into extreme criminal acts. What are the conditions there? Or is the Santa Barbara story as much a mental health story as it is a cult story?
It's a great question. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. In the Santa Barbara tragedy, it could be, and I don't know his mental health history, it could be that he does have or did have the ability to, or was prone to kind of paranoid thinking. What can also be true is that you don't need a mental health history per se, or a diagnosis per se, to be driven to that point. And what you do need is you need a very compelling argument that lets you feel or makes you feel that there are no other good options. And it also has a power around it because of the social psychology. So you have the people around you feeding that message, pushing you to that extreme where you feel that you are being actually benevolent by killing. And to get to that point, there has to be a lot of indoctrination. And usually there is sort of a step to it where you start by being confrontative, or you start by maybe pushing people, by crossing those kinds of boundaries. But really, I think the leaders of groups, whether or not anyone has a mental health history or problem, need to take responsibility for working people up into a froth in this way. It's not unlike honor killings or suicide bombings, genocides, Holocaust. That's on a larger scale, but here we see it on a single scale. It's the same indoctrination.
And Jitharth, one thing that has become clear in the coverage of QAnon is how the online phenomenon takes this life of its own, right? Where the current events, the obscure predictions, the random coincidences all sort of get folded into validating the belief system. And so I'm curious how, as an insider, previous Q-related violent events were collectively explained, right? Like Anthony Camello, who murdered Frank Cali in March 2019. And then in November 2020, the Kentucky woman, Nellie Petrie Blanchard, killing Christopher Hallett, who was actually trying to help her regain custody of her two twin daughters. Of course, prior to all of this, a prelude to QAnon is Edgar Welch storming into Comet Ping Pong and firing shots as he tried to free the supposedly sex-trafficked kids from a basement that he then found was not actually even there. When you were involved in the QAnon belief system, how did you and those who shared your beliefs make sense of those violent incidents?
So I'll explain what the general belief was, and then I'll explain my belief. So in regards to the I think the mob boss who got killed, that was looked at as a good thing, that this did happen, and that's a good thing, and good on him. In regards to Comet Ping Pong and Edgar Welch, he was looked upon as like a bit of a useful idiot, that he had somehow been sort of taken over by the CIA and, like the Oklahoma City bomber or something, and had his mind warped and in order to make people look bad. And in terms of the mother, she was looked up as, people just thought that was a bit of a beat up. They just thought, this is just fake news. There was another one as well. There was a mother in April who killed her two children because she was concerned and thought the town was part of a gigantic pedophile ring. There was the Nashville bomber. He was diagnosed with cancer, but he also believed in the same thing that this recent guy did about reptilians and conspiracy theories and whatnot. So I think that's generally kind of how it was looked by the community. For me personally, I didn't have any reason to think that these weren't legitimate, authentic events. I didn't ascribe them to being false flags or some, whatever, like, it's just fake news or whatnot.
Yeah.
Only because I thought it's pretty low stakes for a PSYOP. You'd probably need a lot of effort. There'd be a big budget. Have to hire a lot of consultants, and that's all you could come up with. Like, no one even died.
So you were being reasonable about that.
On that one narrow aspect.
Yes.
But in the way I was being unreasonable is I just thought they were misguided sheep. I just thought, look, but some people are bound to go crazy. Some people just can't handle the truth. Q did say that the truth will put 99% of people in a hospital. So that just means that I'm extra special. That's kind of how I looked at it.
How do you imagine, you may not have thoughts, but I'm curious, how do you imagine people who are still involved will react to this new event?
I had to look at it. They just said it was fake news.
Okay.
It was fake news. Or the guy obviously just said QAnon as an excuse because he wanted to get back at his wife, and it was sensational. Which, look, I think it goes back to something that Rachel said, that there's almost it's almost like QAnon and conspiracy theories are kind of like a catalyst. Like, he was probably very angry with his wife, and he probably was looking for a way to hurt her. And then when he fell down this rabbit hole and he realized his children were, reptilians or Nephilim, or whatever, he, like Rachel said, he was trying to save them, ironically.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest problem, is that the worst evil is done by people who think they're doing the highest good.